I've erased with creativity all around me. From my father's side, I got a very musical gene. I play multiple instruments, and in general, I just love music. And from my mother's side, I got that very visual, artistic gene, but also things like writing. My parents are both historians, so I've always loved stories. Throughout my whole childhood, I've been just raised with a lot of creativity, and I tend to take that for granted. And this week, I actually got back into drawing. I bought a sketchbook. I used to be an avid artist. I used to draw so much, especially during the COVID period. I used to draw a lot, and I kind of fell out of love with it, and for multiple reasons that I'm not going to get into. I just want to give you a brief reason for this episode, how I came to this idea, and that's because I rediscovered my love for art. And when I was drawing so avidly, I had this whole story in my head. I actually started writing a book, and I drew the characters from the book, and now I'm very much into that story again. Of course, in my mind, I've changed it a lot since then, but still the essence of what I wanted to do with that story is still there. So for me, it's very interesting. It's a story that I started thinking about, started coming up with when I was 15. And so to get back into it, obviously a lot has changed, but it's kind of special to me. And, the ideas are flowing and the creativity is brewing. So that was kind of the inspiration for this episode. So yeah, let me give you a quick introduction of what we're going to do today, what we're going to discuss, because I'm very, very excited. I hope you are too. So yeah, if you look at this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can see the theme of the podcast, and it says self-help, so kind of self-improvement. But obviously, I don't want to be a podcast that's just that. I could only choose one topic, and I thought that was kind of what summarized it. But if you go on that self-improvement side of social media, very often you're going to see, oh, you need to work so hard, you need to have all of these skills, and you just need to have discipline, and you need to grind. And that is not what this podcast is about. In fact, with this episode, I'm trying to counteract that a little bit and go more into that finding purpose and meaning and happiness. And I think one very good way to do that is with creativity and with finding that pleasure and that joy, not in endless binge watching or in social media and scrolling, or even in, you can go further, like even in validation from others, but really in what you do. And this can be a lot of things, but I think creative hobbies and just creativity in life is so important. So yeah, we have a lot to talk about, but as a brief introduction, a few reasons why you might want to introduce creativity into your life is to reduce your stress levels, to improve your cognitive function and your overall happiness. But also one thing that is very, very interesting, at least to me, is that creativity has a very strong connection with adaptability. Being able to think outside of the box is going to help you in so many ways, in your career success, in your relationships, and just in your general mental resilience. So creativity is not just, I play an instrument on the side, or I sketch sometimes. It can really reframe your way of thinking and give you perspectives that in other ways you would not have had. So yeah, I'm a big advocate for creativity, if you can't tell. So I'm very excited for this episode. Let's get into it. But first, since I'm a relatively new podcast, this is my 3rd episode, I would like to kindly ask you to follow, to subscribe. Also to, if you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast, if you could leave a review, hopefully a good one. That would really be a major help to me. Obviously, I do this podcast not for money or for fame or anything, but it is nice to be able to reach more like-minded people, because in the end, I'm trying to learn myself and bring that knowledge that I do by researching for these episodes every week and to get that to more people. So it would definitely be a huge help to me. I'm also on Instagram if any of you want to follow me on there. And yeah, that was a little self-promo section here. But without further ado, let's get into the podcast. So a quick overview of the podcast today. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about science. As you know, if you are a listener of the podcast, I like to back what I'm saying up by science. So most of the time I choose from psychology, philosophy, or neuroscience. So first we're going to talk a little about actually proven things about creativity and the connection to your life. And then I'm going to get into two major creative parts that I really recommend you get into. Of course, there are so many others, but these are just specific ones. So first is the power of visual expression. So things like painting, sketching, drawing. And then after that, I want to get into writing and storytelling. So things like world building. I'm going to get into that really quickly. And then I'm going to briefly also touch upon some other ways in your everyday life where creativity can be of help and where you can find creativity. And then lastly, if you are an avid listener of the podcast, you already know, but I always like to end with a little action-based conclusion because I don't really think that so many people listen to conclusions. So I like to keep them short, but also very interesting and also very effective. So including this action-based portion, always make sure that you guys don't just listen to the episode and forget everything, but it actually helps you to bring change into your life. So that's the plan for today. There are always timestamps in the description down below if you would like to skip to a certain part. And otherwise, I just want to thank you for listening to the Avenly Collective. And yeah, let's get into the episode. So as I mentioned, first we are going to get into a little bit of the science about creativity. So first let's get into the neuroscience of creativity by Dr. Rex Young. So he argues or he discusses in his research that creativity can activate what he calls the DMN, which stands for the default mode network. So he describes the DMN as our brain system for imagination, self-reflection, and innovation. So basically a system in our brain or some kind of neural pathway that is really focused on thinking outside of the box, imagination, and finding different possibilities, finding different answers to problems, which I think is really, really interesting. And further in his research, Dr. Rex Young also mentions that creativity can actually lead to stronger neural connectivity, which means that it can help with improved memory, problem solving, and emotional intelligence. So it's not just being creative can, in that moment, give you some benefits, some happiness, some imagination, but he also argues that you can use it in different aspects on your life as well. So that emotional intelligence and that problem solving, even that improved memory, that isn't necessarily tied to creativity, but apparently that it does really help. And then connecting it to that Harvard study that I mentioned from 2018, they also mentioned that creativity is something very, very valuable, especially as it increases dopamine levels. We've talked a bit about dopamine levels in the other episodes, but basically for you who don't know, very briefly, dopamine levels can give you a little bit more happiness and some motivation. So definitely something you would want to increase, and that definitely happens with creativity. But also they say on the long term, it improves neuroplasticity. Again, we've already talked a bit about neuroplasticity. Basically, it's your brain's ability to be flexible and to adapt. So if you're learning a new skill, that neuroplasticity will make sure that you get better and you actually improve. And that is your brain adapting to circumstances. That is that neuroplasticity. And so they actually proved in their research that creativity can help with that neuroplasticity. So yeah, Dr. Rex Young and Harvard University both say that yes, in a moment you get some happiness, some motivation due to your dopamine levels, but on the long term you actually also see some stronger neural connectivity, neuroplasticity, innovation, self-reflection, etc., etc. But also, another piece of research from the Journal of Positive Psychology in 2016 talks about creativity and stress reduction. So not only does it just bring positive things, it can also counteract negative things. For example, stress. We see in this piece of research that basically in this piece of research, they let the participants do about 45 minutes of artistic activity, and they saw that their cortisol levels lowered actually. So that can definitely reduce your stress. For me, cortisol is not necessarily bad. Cortisol can be great if you're doing a very hefty workout, but of course you do want to be able to lower that stress as well, and apparently doing some kind of artistic activity, so really letting that creativity flow can really help with that, which is really, really interesting. They describe creativity as a sort of meditation, which I think is very interesting because I've tried to meditate so many times. My mind just doesn't seem to like it. I do still want to try it. I do still want to get better at it. But apparently creativity does have some of the same effects as meditation, as that it induces this kind of flow state that reduces your anxiety. Definitely some very interesting research. And then lastly, it's not research, it's more so of a case study, but I quickly wanted to talk about this polymath approach. Maybe you've already seen it on the internet. I've definitely come across it in the kind of self-improvement space, but it's often linked with Leonardo da Vinci, which you've very probably already heard of. If you haven't, brief introduction. During the Renaissance period, Leonardo da Vinci, he's known for so many different things. Mostly he's known as a scientist and an artist. You know the Mona Lisa. If you don't know the Mona Lisa, I'm just a tad concerned about your cultural awareness, but nothing you can't fix. But yeah, he used to paint a lot, sketch a lot, but also be a scientist. Basically, he was a polymath, which means that you have expertise in a lot of different fields, a lot of knowledge in a lot of different fields, and these fields can all help other fields to grow. So as we saw, his creativity that he often used in his paintings actually worked across different fields. He used this creativity in his science, in his engineering, and in his writing to be able to think about different things, to think outside of the box, really. So those problem-solving skills he used in his science and in his engineering are definitely creative thinking. As I've been trying to get across, creativity is not just, a few moments of some soul-filling happiness, which is still really nice, but it does have long-term effects and good effects in different fields and in all fields of life, in my opinion at least. So yeah, I hope I've kind of convinced you with this little section that creativity really has so much to do with our life and can influence our life so much. So yeah, I hope I've convinced you to have a little bit creativity in your life. And as I've said before, I'm going to get into my personal 2 major aspects of creativity that I love to do. But there are so many others, of course. But I think these are some of the biggest ones as well. But of course, go on your own little deep dive to find out what it is that you want to do and that sparks your interest and that can help you be creative. So first, I want to touch upon visual expression. So drawing, painting, sketching, you name it. So really visual expression of art. So the first thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is a phenomenon called art therapy. So this actually exists, and it's a form of therapy where people draw out certain things while they are in therapy. And apparently it does really work. There are multiple studies around it, but just in general, we see that it can really help with emotional processing and to not feel as overwhelmed by it just because you are drawing it. And it apparently also helps to reduce trauma responses. So it helps to kind of regulate and balance those emotions, which doesn't mean, of course, that those people went through something very, very difficult and they just draw and they're fine. That's not what I'm trying to say. But we do see that art therapy can really help with processing those emotions of that traumatic experience or whatever they're in therapy for. So yeah, just briefly wanted to touch upon that. I think that's very interesting that creativity is even used in therapy. And then secondly, I wanted to touch upon some research by Wammes. I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, but it was done in 2019. And he studied the connection between drawing and memory. So as I said previously, creativity can help your neuroplasticity, can help that neural connectivity. But here he specifically studied drawing and memory. So he studied two groups and they had to memorize a few things, and there was one group who wrote it down and one group who drew it. And we see that the people who drew the information instead of writing it down actually had better memory retention. They were able to memorize more and better. So maybe for your next exam you can draw everything out instead of writing it. But right now, let's get into writing and storytelling. All right, I am very, very excited for this section, and I loved researching for it just because I'm very, very into this story right now. I don't know if any of you know the app Obsidian. It's like this note-taking app, but you can create connections between your different notes and everything. And I've been doing that a little bit for the story, and I don't know, it's just so satisfying. But anyways, let's get into the section. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is more so the writing aspect, not necessarily writing as in writing a novel or a story or anything like that, just the aspect of writing, and that is about journaling. Again, you've probably already kind of heard of journaling if you're on this self-improvement side of social media, but it is proven to help with your mental health by a couple of different researchers. I here chose the research from Jane Pennebaker. Again, all of these names, I'm butchering them, and I truly apologize. But yeah, Jane is a psychologist, and she talks about this. And she talked about expressive writing. So it does not necessarily have to be about your life. Journaling often is, especially if you journal when you're faced with a tough decision or you had a bad day or maybe a very good day, but you're writing very expressively. That tends to help with your emotional regulation. But what I found really interesting is that she also saw a connection between your immune function. So I don't know, that was just so interesting to me. But yeah, apparently it can help with your immune function. So it can help with your resistance, which I think is very interesting. And then she also, again, mentioned those lower depression rates and those anxiety levels. So journaling can really help with those emotions and reflecting on those emotions and trying to figure out what's going on with you, which is always such a journey, and you never really get out of it, but you do feel like you're growing. But every single time you find something out, you have something else you want to find out about yourself, and I feel like that journey of finding yourself and aligning yourself with your emotions, it never really stops. One question leads to 10 more questions, and you never feel like you're done. But it's a really good way to find yourself and to discover what you want, because, and this is a whole other conversation and topic, so I won't really get into it, but this is just the last thing I'm going to say. In today's society, especially with social media, everyone is just telling you what to do. Everyone is telling you become an entrepreneur. Everyone is telling you need to make $1 million. Everyone is telling you to be a certain way, to dress a certain way, to do all these things with your life. But in the end, you just need to step away from it all and just write it down and just think, what do I want? And I think that journaling can really help with that, to discover who you are and what you want instead of what other people are trying to tell you what it is you should want, and what is considered to be successful and good, and what is to be considered a happy, successful life. Because for you, that might be something totally else than someone else. And so, yeah, I'm really an advocate for writing and for journaling. And then I wanted to get into storytelling because, well, I've already told you. So I'm just so in love with the story I'm writing right now. I won't get into that, but so that's what kind of fueled this episode together with getting into art. And so I wanted to briefly touch upon storytelling as well. Specifically this research from Dan McAdams, and he is doing research in narrative psychology, and he studied a bit about storytelling and personal identity. So again, finding yourself and finding it is what you want. Apparently with storytelling, again, there is a connection. So he argues that the way we tell things, so the way we write stories, the way we tell things to others, the way we tell our stories really, shapes our self-perception and our future choices. I talked about it in my last episode about how your thoughts can just shape what it is you're experiencing. Two people can experience the same thing, think about it differently, and then one might be happy about it, one might be sad. So your thoughts are everything. And apparently what he says is that the way we tell it are kind of our thoughts, but verbally or written down, is also kind of our perception of the world and of ourselves, and that can really influence how we continue to see life and continue to see ourselves, which I think is just so incredibly interesting. I could talk about this for days. But yeah, we also talked about, again, in the last episode, I'm doing so much self-promo in this episode, and I truly apologize. I'm just genuinely so interested and so in love with every single thing I research that I just can't help it. But yeah, we also talked about if we are thinking very negatively, one way to counteract that is to reframe your thoughts. And apparently that can really help with storytelling as well. With your thoughts, it might be a little bit difficult because you can't control it that much, right? You have a lot of thoughts going in and out, and it's sometimes very hard to control. What we can control is what we write down. So apparently he says we can reframe things with storytelling, so either verbally or written down. If we talk about challenges, if we talk about things that are very difficult, if we can tell it as this kind of heroic narrative, it can improve our resilience against these challenges, right? If we look at stories, in a lot of stories actually, can be biographies, can be fantasy books, can be whatever, very often the main character or just one of the characters in general are faced with a challenge. That's what makes the book interesting. The way often that this is told, you're rooting for them, right? To get over that challenge and to see how they get over that challenge. And we can reframe our challenges in our mind or on paper like that as well. If we are faced with a challenge, see it as that bridge that main character has to cross, and that challenge they have to overcome, and that's their final battle of the book, so to say. Can you tell the book I'm writing is a fantasy book? I have not mentioned the word sword yet, but I feel like I'm getting close. But yeah, I also just love reading, so this is right up my alley. I need to stop fangirling over my own podcast episode. Let me take a breath. Okay, so we can reframe things in our life, but we can do this in so many different ways, right? If we are seeing our own life as a story. You've probably heard about this thing about thinking like you're the main character, right? And to live your life to the fullest, live like you are in a movie. If we can see this as a story, we can kind of get an outside perspective as well, which is just a whole other area of research, but we can think more objectively about things. and we can reframe things. So, okay, maybe you really don't like autumn, for example. You hate that it rains a lot, you hate that it gets cold. Autumn, for me, it's a lot of rain, cold, whatever. You don't like it. You think everything's dying, I don't like autumn. But if you reframe it and you think, okay, right now I'm in Gilmore Girls and the leaves are brown and orange and I'm inside with a crackling fire reading a book with a cup of tea and I'm kind of having that background noise of rain. All of a sudden, autumn doesn't sound all too bad, does it? I kind of really love doing that. For example, like if I really don't want to study, I just think, okay, right now I'm a Harvard student and I'm about to have the best exam season ever. I'm like Rory Gilmore right now. And you see, like, making things into a story can actually give so much more meaning to your life, but it can also just make things that you don't like so much more interesting. Like, I don't like doing the dishes, but if it's part of my story and it has value, all of a sudden it doesn't sound too bad. So yeah, for me, I love making things into a little story and a little movie about my life. So that was my little rant about writing and storytelling. Can you see I really like this topic? But yeah, let's now talk about a little bit of the other creative aspects in your everyday life, because that's just so interesting as well, because I've talked about how creativity can kind of help you in that polymath approach and to get those benefits of creativity in other parts and fields of your life as well. So let's get a little bit into that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is business and science, which kind of goes back to that polymath approach that I literally talked about 2 seconds ago. But yeah, one other polymath or someone who did utilize that creative thinking is Albert Einstein, actually, and we all know how valuable his research was. And he actually said that, quote, "Imagination is more important than knowledge," unquote. So yeah, kind of speaks for itself. Imagination is more important than knowledge. It's more important to be able to think creatively and to think outside of the box. For example, right now I'm in university, and even though I'm staying in university, obviously, university is so valuable, a lot of what you learn is just what to do, and it's kind of a show and follow approach, if that makes sense. But such a valuable skill is being able to think about it differently and to think outside of the box. And I think when you do enter the career market, do let me know if you are an older person listening to this. Doesn't mean you're old, you're just older than me, you're out of uni already. I think in that career market, people really value innovation and coming up with new ideas. And you don't learn that just by seeing and copying, if that makes sense. So that's what he means with this quote: imagination is more important than knowledge. Yes, you can know how to solve one specific math problem, but can you utilize that knowledge and think about it differently to solve an even harder one? That is the difference between knowledge and imagination, between just regular intelligence and that creative thinking. It is just utilizing your knowledge in a totally different way, and that is just incredibly important. So again, I can't stress it enough. Doing something creative in your life can help you so much, but that comes in so many different forms. Like, for example, cooking, gardening, and listening to music is already creative, and we see that it can boost your brain function and improve your mental health. So you don't have to go and paint 6 hours per day or learn a new instrument. If that's not what you like, don't do it. Find other ways that you can be creative and that you love. Maybe you love to cook. So take a little bit more time to do that and really make it look beautiful on the little plate. Even if it's just for you and no one is going to be seeing it, it always tastes better if it looks good. I really like making little yogurt parfaits, so with banana or with kiwi or whatever. And yeah, I do chop them up and lay them down really nicely. And does it matter? No. Does anyone see it besides me? No. But it's nice. And I don't know, that is a really simple example. I'm in no way a Michelin star cook. But if you do really like cooking, experiment with new recipes. Lay it out nicely on the plate. Find ways in your everyday life that you can do a little bit more creatively. That is already kind of a segue into our little conclusion, our action-based portion of today's video. So let's get into it, because I really think this is the most valuable part of every single episode I make, of just every single podcast or video or whatever ever. Obviously, I do kind of want you to listen to the rest of the podcast, but the action is just always proven to be better. You can listen to money-making podcasts and how to invest for so long. You can listen to so many different ones, but if you never invest 1 cent, all of that doesn't matter. You see? So the action is just always the most important part. Let's get into it. So I have written down 4 little bullet points for you to hopefully implement into your life or to experiment with. If you don't like it, you don't have to do it, obviously. It's whatever you want. But these are things that I really find helpful in my daily life to use, to think a little bit more creatively, to think a little bit more outside of the box. So yeah, first of all, we have mind mapping. I know we all hate mind maps. I know we all had to do them in school. But hear me out. You organize your thoughts in a very visual way, right? And that can just give you new ideas. That can really boost idea generation. So for example, this is the last time I'm talking about it. I'm sorry, but I am going to talk about it. For the story I'm writing, I am mind mapping right now. All of these different world building aspects, and then you add another little piece and another little piece, and it all just helps to generate even more ideas. It's so satisfying, and you get so much deeper. I did hate them in school, but right now I'm a fan, and I think you should give it another try. Secondly, brainstorming walks. I wrote this down as an episode idea, so I do want to make an episode about this, but I also have 35 different ideas. So the chance that this will be the next episode is fairly small, but it is in there. Anyways, there is a lot of research about this, but walks, especially without any music, like without any distraction at all, no podcast, no nothing, can really help you to think divergently. It was actually research in Stanford in 2014. Very, very interesting. But yeah, being able to go on a walk can really, really generate ideas and help you think in different ways. It depends, of course, where you live. But especially if you live in a city where there's not much greenery, if you go on a walk in nature, you are just in such a different environment that it can really help shift your perspective and to think in a different light. That change of environment can do so much. Maybe you're walking with this podcast right now and there's nothing wrong with it. I'm just saying, like, if you want more ideas and you just feel like you're stuck, you feel like you're just stuck in this one specific mindset and you want to get a different perspective, a walk can really help. Then thirdly, change your inputs. We all know that, or it's kind of common sense, that your inputs determine your outputs, right? For example, you quite literally, if you eat really bad, so a lot of fast food, a lot of sugar, obviously your output, like you're going to be so much more tired, so your output is often going to be a little bit worse. You have less energy, you feel more sluggish, while if you have good inputs, you have good nutritional food, you often feel more energized. Your brain function is better, you can think more clearly. So change your inputs in order to change your outputs. So explore new books. For example, I know, again, in the whole self-improvement side, everyone is reading so many different self-improvement books. And while there's a lot to say about that, not necessarily bad things, not only bad things, but try and pick up a fiction book. It doesn't mean you are wasting your time. In fact, you're expanding your vocabulary. You're improving your emotional intelligence, especially when the book handles a lot of emotional challenges and obstacles. It can just help you immensely. It can give you a different perspective. It can help you understand other kinds of people. I can say so much about reading fiction because I truly love it, but this does not only apply to books. But yeah, read different kinds of books, different kinds of genres, listen to new kinds of music, explore different perspectives. If you really want to go very, very far with this, go travel, go to the other side of the world and just explore those cultures, the way they think. I think it is so very valuable. So yeah, you can go as far as you want with this. You can do this in all kinds of areas you want. But again, if you're feeling stuck, if you feel like nothing new is coming into your brain, change your inputs. Try out a different sport, explore new music, explore new podcasts, explore new parts of your town, whatever it may be. Just change something to change you. Because nothing changes if nothing changes. And then lastly, again, a whole episode on its own. Can you tell that I'm thinking creatively in this episode? How many episode ideas have I come up with in this episode alone? It's crazy. But the last thing I wanted to talk about was boredom. Oh my God, we cannot be bored anymore. Because of social media, because of being able to watch any show anytime. It's crazy, this world of escapism. We cannot be bored. And I struggle with this a lot as well, especially when I first deleted all my social media. I had so much free time and I knew that I could do something, but I just genuinely did not know what to do. You know, I worked out, I did my groceries, I read a little bit, I studied a little bit, and then it was just like 4 p.m. And then you just stare at the wall and you think, well, what do I do now? You know? But boredom can be such an asset. It can help your mind wander freely. And being able to let go and just let your mind do its thing can be so valuable. Can really bring breakthroughs, can bring new ideas, can bring new perspectives. And I think with this whole episode, I kind of demonstrated, or hopefully I got the point across that is so valuable and so very important. So yeah, that was everything I wanted to say today. I'm feeling inspired. I hope you are too. I genuinely love this topic so much. So I think there are a few things I said in here that I can definitely get deeper into. They are added to the list, to the never-ending list. So there are a lot of episodes to come. Make sure that if you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, to give it a rating. If you are listening on YouTube, to give it a like, to subscribe to the podcast. I would also really love to hear your feedback. So send me a DM on Instagram or leave a comment or a review on whatever platform you're listening on. It would honestly really help me because obviously this is a new podcast. This is the first podcast I've ever done. So obviously I'm not very experienced. I do really love it, but if there's something you think could be improved upon, do really let me know. But also just because I'm making this podcast for me, because I'm learning and I want to share that with you guys. But if there's something you would like to learn about, I'm sure I would love to learn about it as well. So this podcast is really for you guys as well. So let me know if there's anything specific you want to hear. Thank you so much for listening to the Avenly Collective. And I will see you again in the next episode. Bye!